brandished and paralyzed. An Apache woman faced death, until one cowboy refused to let her die. Nayeli had always been proud of her place in her tribe. As an Apache woman, she had grown up learning the ways of her people, how to move silently through the forest, how to track animals, and how to listen to the wind. Her mother had taught her how to gather herbs for medicine, and her father had shown her how to survive in the mountains even in the harshest winters. She loved her family and her home deeply, but life, she would soon learn, could change in the blink of an eye. It started with a misunderstanding. Nayeli had gone to collect firewood near the edge of the tribe's territory, as she often did. She had seen another member of the tribe, a young man, taking more than his share of food from the communal supplies. Nayeli had spoken up, gently at first, reminding him that the resources were shared equally, but he had laughed at her, mocking her words, breaths. Voices were raised, and soon a small argument had turned into a loud confrontation. The elders of the tribe arrived, drawn by the noise. Nayeli tried to explain calmly what had happened, but the young man spoke faster and louder, twisting her words. He accused her of disrespecting him, and the elders, who feared conflict, were quick to act. They had been strict about order, about respect, about obedience. Nayeli had never intended to disobey, but in that moment she felt powerless. The decision was made swiftly. She was banished from the tribe. Nayeli's heart sank. Being banished meant more than just leaving her home. It meant leaving her family, her friends, and the only life she had ever known. The mountains that once felt safe and familiar now seemed dangerous and unwelcoming. She was told she could not return until the elders decided she had proved herself worthy again. With no time to gather her belongings, Nayeli was forced to leave. Immediately, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the land she had loved all her life. She walked for hours, her feet cutting into the rocky ground, her stomach empty, her mind filled with fear and confusion. At first, she hoped someone would come after her, that the tribe would realize their mistake. But as night fell and the cold wind bit at her skin, reality sank in. She was alone. Completely alone. But passage, the wilderness that had once seemed like a playground now felt like a trap. Days passed, and Nayeli tried to survive as best she could. She found water from a stream and gathered what little she could from the forest. But her strength began to fade. One morning, while climbing a steep ridge, Nayeli's foot slipped on loose stones. She fell, twisting her leg in a way that she instantly knew was serious. Pain shot through her body, and when she tried to move, she realized she could not stand. Panic rose in her chest as she attempted to crawl, but the pain was unbearable. She was paralyzed from the waist down. She cried out, hoping someone would hear her, but only the wind and the distant calls of birds answered. The sky above was a brilliant blue, but Nayeli could not see the beauty. All she could feel was fear. Fear of dying alone, fear of being forgotten, fear of the cold nights that were fast approaching. Hunger gnawed at her, and thirst burned her throat. She had no fire, no shelter, and no way to call for help. Nayeli's mind raced. How could she survive like this? She had been trained to survive, but never had she imagined facing death so directly. Every sound in the forest startled her, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a coyote. Her mind replayed the moments that led her here. She thought of her family, her mother's gentle hands, her father's strong arms, and her younger siblings' laughter. Tears streamed down her face, and she whispered prayers she had learned as a child, hoping that someone somewhere would answer. Night fell, bringing with it a chilling cold breeze. Nayeli shivered violently, her body unable to generate enough heat. She tried to move onto her side to sleep, but even the smallest movement brought waves of pain. She curled up as best she could, trying to conserve energy, and stared at the stars above. They were bright and distant, cold in their beauty, and she felt even more alone under their silent gaze. Her hunger became a constant companion. She had no way to hunt, no strength to climb trees for fruit, and no means to catch fish from the stream below. The thought of dying slowly, of being forgotten in the forest, filled her with despair. Her memories of the tribe now carried a bitter edge as she wondered why a lifetime of loyalty and obedience could be erased so easily. She hated herself for being weak, and yet she knew that even the strongest person could fall in these circumstances. Time blurred. Nayeli lost track of days. Though she knew the sun rose and fell, she spoke to herself to keep her mind alive, recounting the lessons her mother had taught her. "The forest will give you what it can," she whispered. "But you must fight." She thought of the animals she had tracked, of the rabbits and deer she had followed silently. Maybe if she could reach the stream, maybe if she could drag herself closer, she could find water and some berries. Her body grew weaker, but her mind refused to give up completely. She imagined someone finding her, rescuing her, telling her that she was not alone. But as the hours passed, the thought of help seemed more like a dream than a reality. Nayeli realized that her survival depended entirely on herself, and yet her body would not obey. She felt despair crushing her, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. In a rare moment of courage, Nayeli decided to try moving again. She used her arms to drag herself along the forest floor, pulling her body inch by inch toward the sound of running water. Every movement sent pain through her spine and legs, but she refused to give in to fear completely. She whispered words of encouragement to herself, imagining her father's voice saying, "Do not quit, Nayeli. Do not give up." Hours passed like this, and finally she reached the edge of a small stream. She drank greedily, letting the cold water revive her slightly. She found a few berries nearby and ate them, savoring their sweetness as if it were a feast. Though her body ached, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she could survive another day. Or maybe someone would find her. As night fell again, Nayeli curled near the stream, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time in days, she felt a small sense of peace. She knew the coming nights would be even colder, that hunger and pain would not relent. But she also knew she had the strength to endure a little longer. Somewhere out there, help might be coming. Somewhere out there, someone might refuse to let her die. And though she could not imagine it yet, Nayeli's story was far from over. The forest that had seemed so cruel now held a secret. Someone was about to enter her life who would change everything. Until then, she survived. Inch by inch, breath by breath, tear by tear, Nayeli fought against the darkness surrounding her, refusing to give in to death, refusing to let the wilderness claim her just yet. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine. Nayeli had spent another freezing night near the stream. Her body ached in ways she had never known, every muscle screaming from the fall and the long hours of dragging herself across the rough ground. Yet, as the sun rose, a small sense of determination filled her. She had survived the night. Maybe today would be different. She listened carefully, straining her ears for any sound that could bring help or danger. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and somewhere in the distance, water rushed over stones. Nayeli tried to ignore the fear that had grown heavy in her chest. She knew she could not stay in one place forever. The forest could be unforgiving. Animals could come too close, or another accident could leave her even weaker. She needed help, but she had no idea how to find it. Meanwhile, several miles away, a cowboy named Jacob was making his way along a worn trail. He was a solitary man, used to long hours on horseback tending to his cattle. Jacob had learned to notice details others might miss: the tracks of deer, the marks left by a bear, or the faint signs of human movement. On this particular morning, his sharp eyes caught something unusual on a dirt path. There were broken twigs, footprints in the mud, and a piece of torn fabric that looked out of place. Curiosity mixed with caution. Jacob dismounted and approached the area slowly, scanning the surroundings. He was used to strangers in the wild, some friendly, some not, but the signs suggested someone had been struggling and maybe injured. He followed the trail carefully, knowing that the forest could hide danger as easily as it could hide beauty. As Jacob moved forward, he noticed deeper signs of distress: more broken branches, drag marks across the dirt, and small patches of blood. His heart sank. Whoever this was, they were in trouble. He quickened his pace, calling out gently, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Nayeli's ears caught a faint sound. Human voices. Her heart leapt. Could it be possible? Someone was near. Raven steps. She tried to call out, but her voice was weak, hoarse from days without proper food or water. Her fear flared. What if this person was not friendly? What if they left her to die? But as the sound grew closer, a strange feeling of hope settled in her chest. Jacob finally saw her, lying near the stream, barely able to move. At first he froze, unsure what to do. She was so small and frail, and her condition looked serious. But the sight of her helplessness sparked something inside him. He could not leave her there. He dismounted completely, walking carefully toward her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and steady. Nayeli blinked up at him, unsure if she could trust him. Her body trembled, her lips barely able to form words. "Please, help me," she whispered. Jacob nodded, understanding immediately. He had seen injuries before, but he had never seen someone so vulnerable in the wild. Gently he approached, keeping his distance until he could assess her injuries. He saw the twisted leg, the bruises, the exhaustion on her face. He realized that she could not walk on her own. If she were left here, she would not survive another night. He spoke softly, trying to calm her fears.
"It's okay. I won't leave you."
"I promise. We're going to get you somewhere safe." Nayeli's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in days, she felt the possibility of hope. Someone had refused to abandon her. Someone had chosen to care. Jacob searched the area for materials to help her move. He found a few long branches and some strong vines and began fashioning a makeshift stretcher. Nayeli watched, amazed at his determination. "Can you carry me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'll get you out of here." The task was harder than he had expected. The forest floor was uneven and slippery, filled with rocks and roots that could trip him at any moment. Nayeli felt guilty for being such a burden, but Jacob would not hear it. He encouraged her to hold on, to stay strong, and to trust him. Slowly, inch by inch, he lifted her onto the stretcher, supporting her weight with all his strength. Once she was secured, Jacob began the long journey back to the trail he had come from. Each step was difficult. He stumbled over roots, slipped on wet stones, and felt the strain in his back and arms. But he kept going. Nayeli could see his determination, and it gave her courage. She whispered encouragements, too, even though her voice was weak. You can do it. We can. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, then began to dip toward the horizon. Jacob moved steadily, talking to Nayeli to keep her distracted from the pain. He told her stories of the ranch, of the animals he cared for, of the long nights he had spent under the stars. Nayeli listened, trying to absorb every word, to cling to the sound of human voice as her lifeline. Despite the exhaustion, Jacob never wavered. Even when his muscles burned, even when his hands bled from gripping the rough branches, he refused to stop. Nayeli began to understand that some people had a strength that went beyond physical ability. It was courage, determination, and compassion that made him keep going. By evening, they reached a small clearing where the land leveled out. Ground. Desperate, Jacob set Nayeli down carefully on the soft grass. He tore strips of cloth from his own shirt to make her more comfortable and wrapped her in a blanket he had carried. Nayeli's teeth chattered, and Jacob rubbed her arms gently, trying to keep her warm. "You're safe now," he said. "We'll find help soon. Don't give up." "Bait, you're going to be okay." Nayeli's eyes welled with tears. She wanted to speak, but the words would not come. She simply nodded, holding on to the tiny thread of hope he had given her. Night fell quickly, and the forest grew dark and cold. Jacob built a small fire, careful to keep it contained, and used it to warm both of them. Nayeli felt the heat on her skin and shivered with relief. The smell of smoke and the crackle of flames brought her a strange comfort. For the first time since her banishment, she felt that someone truly cared. As they rested, Jacob spoke again, telling her that he would carry her to the nearest settlement where she could receive proper care. Nayeli listened, feeling a flicker of strength return. Prescribed as, she realized that she had been on the brink of death, and now someone had refused to let her die. That thought filled her with gratitude and awe. Even in her weakened state, Nayeli began to see the world differently. The forest that had seemed so hostile now appeared less frightening because she was not facing it alone. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to dream of survival, of returning to life, and of finding a way back to the tribe, or perhaps forging a new path entirely. Jacob stayed awake much of the night, keeping watch and making sure Nayeli did not slip further into weakness. He had no idea who she was, or why fate had placed her in the forest, but he knew this: no one deserved to die alone when help was possible. His determination never wavered, and Nayeli felt it radiating through her. By dawn, a quiet understanding had formed between them. Nayeli trusted Jacob. She understood that he had risked everything to save a stranger in need, and Jacob, though he rarely allowed himself to care for anyone outside his life of solitude, felt a sense of responsibility and connection he had never known before. Together they prepared to continue the journey. Jacob adjusted the stretcher and checked that Nayeli was secure. She nodded faintly, ready to face another day with him. The forest around them was still wild and dangerous, but for the first time, Nayeli believed she could survive. For she had faced despair, she had faced hunger and pain, but she had not faced defeat. And now, with Jacob by her side, she understood that survival was not just about strength. It was about trust, courage, and the kindness of others. As they moved forward, the forest no longer felt endless. There was a direction, a goal, and a reason to continue. Nayeli leaned back on the makeshift stretcher, closing her eyes briefly, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and allowing herself a quiet hope. Perhaps, after all, she would not die here in the wilderness. Perhaps she would live and someday tell the story of how one cowboy refused to let her die. The forest seemed endless, stretching in every direction with thick trees and tangled undergrowth. Nayeli lay on the makeshift stretcher, feeling every bump and rock beneath her. Her muscles ached with pain, and each movement caused sharp stabs in her legs and back. But despite the discomfort, she felt a faint spark of hope. Jacob had found her. Jacob had refused to leave her behind. And now, with him guiding her through the wilderness, she had a chance to survive. Jacob moved steadily through the trees, adjusting the stretcher whenever he saw an obstacle ahead. The trail was uneven, filled with hidden roots and slippery stones. He had to navigate carefully because one wrong step could send Nayeli tumbling to the ground. The sun was high in the sky, and heat mixed with exhaustion made each step feel heavier. Sweat ran down Jacob's face, but he ignored it, keeping his focus on the task ahead. Bah. Careful, Nayeli whispered weakly, her voice trembling from pain. Please don't. I'm fine, Jacob replied without looking back. Just hold on and we'll get through this. You're stronger than you think. Nayeli wanted to believe him. She had survived this long after all. She had faced hunger, cold, and the pain of being paralyzed. She had crawled across the forest floor with nothing but hope, and now, with Jacob by her side, she felt courage slowly returning. But the journey was far from easy. The terrain became steeper as they moved toward higher ground. Jacob grunted as he lifted the stretcher over rocks and fallen logs. Each step required careful planning, balancing his own strength with the safety of Nayeli. She watched him silently, feeling a mixture of gratitude and guilt. She hated being a burden, but she could not move on her own. All she could do was trust him completely. Hours passed, and the sun began to lower in the sky. Jacob had planned to make camp for the night, but the forest offered little shelter. He scanned the area, finally spotting a small clearing with softer ground and a few low-hanging branches. He laid Nayeli down gently, adjusting the blanket around her to keep her warm. You'll rest here for a little while, he said. We'll continue at first light. Nayeli shivered, the cold air seeping through her clothes. She had almost forgotten the sensation of being cared for, the feeling of safety. Desperate tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me." Jacob shook his head. I couldn't. No one should be left to die alone. Not like this. The night was long and filled with the sounds of the forest. Crickets chirped, owls hooted, and the wind whispered through the trees. Nayeli struggled to sleep, every ache and pain keeping her awake. But she felt comfort in Jacob's presence. He had built a small fire and sat near her, keeping watch. She realized that she was no longer alone in the wilderness. Someone had taken responsibility for her survival, and that gave her strength. Morning came slowly, with golden light filtering through the branches. Breaths. Jacob was awake before her, checking the stretcher and preparing for the next stage of their journey. Ready? He asked softly. But Nayeli nodded, feeling the dull pain in her body as she was lifted once again. The day brought new challenges, but doubts. The forest became denser with thick undergrowth that made it difficult to carry the stretcher. Jacob had to pull branches aside, step carefully over roots, and lift Nayeli higher to avoid low-hanging limbs. Sweat soaked his clothes, and his muscles burned with the effort. But he did not complain. He could feel Nayeli's trust, and he knew he could not fail her. At one point, a sudden downpour caught them off guard. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the forest floor into slippery mud. Jacob cursed softly under his breath, gripping the stretcher tightly to prevent Nayeli from slipping. She clutched the blanket, fear and cold mixing with pain, but Jacob's voice remained calm and steady. "We're almost there," he said. "Keep holding on." "You're doing great." Nayeli's trust in him grew with every passing hour. She realized that survival was not just about strength. It was about courage, determination, and compassion. Breaths. Jacob had all three in abundance. She began to talk to him more, telling him small stories about her life in the tribe, her family, and her childhood. She spoke of her father teaching her to track deer and her mother showing her how to gather herbs. Jacob listened patiently, asking questions and encouraging her to keep speaking. Sharing her story gave Nayeli a sense of control. For the first time since her banishment, she felt like she had a voice. She realized that even though her body was weak, her spirit could remain strong. She began to see Jacob not just as a rescuer, but as a companion, someone who had chosen to care for her when the world had turned its back. The journey continued through the afternoon. Jacob's arms ached, and his back protested, but he kept moving. Breaths. Nayeli tried to help in small ways, shifting her weight when possible, offering words of encouragement, and reminding him to rest briefly when he stumbled. Their partnership, forged in the most difficult circumstances, strengthened with every step. As evening approached, they reached a small river. The current was swift, and crossing it with the stretcher seemed impossible at first. Jacob scouted for a safer spot and found a narrow, shallow section. Break. He waded in carefully, holding the stretcher above the water. Nayeli's heart pounded with fear, but she knew she could trust him. Inch by inch they crossed, the water rushing around Jacob's legs, the weight of the stretcher threatening to pull him down. Once safely across, they rested on the riverbank. Jacob built a small fire, drying their clothes as best he could. Nayeli felt warmth seeping into her bones, a relief she had almost forgotten. She realized how lucky she was, how small gestures of kindness could mean the difference between life and death. During the night, Nayeli's thoughts wandered. She thought of her tribe, wondering what they must believe about her. She wondered if her family would mourn her, if they even remembered her. But she also thought of Jacob, of his bravery and care, and felt a renewed sense of hope. Survival was no longer just a dream. It was a possibility. By morning, both were exhausted but determined. The journey was far from over. Jacob knew the nearest settlement was still miles away, and the terrain ahead would be even more challenging. But he also knew that giving up was not an option. Nayeli had survived this long against incredible odds. He would see her through the next stage, no matter what it took. Brash. Nayeli's confidence grew with each day. She realized that she could endure more than she had thought possible. The forest, once terrifying, now seemed less hostile. She had survived hunger, pain, and the fear of death. Breaths. And with Jacob by her side, she began to believe that she could survive anything. The bond between them deepened. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. Jacob spoke of his life on the ranch, the animals he cared for, and the long nights under the stars. Nayeli shared memories of her childhood, the lessons from her parents, and her dreams for the future. Though they came from different worlds, their shared struggle created a connection neither had expected. By the third day of their journey together, both were tired but hopeful. The forest still posed dangers, but they faced them together. Breaths. Jacob's determination and Nayeli's growing courage created a rhythm that carried them forward. Each step was a small victory, each obstacle overcome a testament to their resilience. Nayeli realized that the wilderness had tested her in every way imaginable. It had pushed her to the brink of despair, but it had also shown her the strength of the human spirit. She had learned to trust, to hope, and to endure. And she had learned that sometimes survival depended not just on skill or strength, but on the kindness and courage of another person. As the sun began to set on the third day, they reached a small ridge overlooking a valley. Jacob paused, letting Nayeli take in the view. The sight of open land and a distant settlement filled her with relief. They were close to safety, close to help, and close to the possibility of a new beginning. Nayeli looked at Jacob, gratitude shining in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Jacob smiled, tired but unwavering. Burst. You don't need to. Just keep holding on. That's enough. Together they prepared to descend into the valley, the promise of safety guiding their steps. Nayeli felt a quiet determination settle in her heart. She had faced death, she had faced fear, and she had faced despair. And now, with Jacob by her side, she knew she could survive anything the world threw at her. The valley stretched before them like a promise of safety. Nayeli lay on the stretcher, exhausted but alert, her eyes tracing the distant shapes of buildings and smoke rising from chimneys. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope, stronger than the fear that had dominated her life since being banished. Jacob's determination had carried her this far, and now help seemed closer than it had ever been. The terrain became gentler as they descended the ridge. Soft grass replaced the uneven rocks, and the path widened into a dirt road leading toward the settlement. Nayeli could see a few people moving in the distance, tending to livestock and walking along the road. Her heart pounded with relief, but also with uncertainty. She had never met strangers outside her tribe, and now she was about to encounter people she had never known. Jacob moved cautiously, keeping the stretcher steady. We're almost there, he said quietly. Perception. Just a little further and you'll be safe. Nayeli nodded, her arms weak from the long journey. She had tried to speak, to thank him, but words failed her. She had survived hunger, cold, pain, and fear. But the exhaustion of the last few days weighed heavily on her. She allowed herself a small smile, though, knowing that the worst was behind her. As they approached the first houses, a few villagers noticed them. Some ran forward to help, seeing the state Nayeli was in. Jacob explained quickly what had happened, how he had found her paralyzed and near death in the forest. The villagers acted with urgency, gathering blankets and helping lift her carefully into a cart that would take her to the local doctor. A ride into the settlement was slow, but it was safer than walking. Nayeli felt the warmth of the blankets and the gentle rocking of the cart, a stark contrast to the harsh forest. She looked at Jacob, feeling a wave of gratitude so strong she could barely hold back tears. I don't know what I would have done without you, she whispered. Jacob gave her a small, reassuring smile. You don't have to thank me. You survived this far, and now you'll have a chance to recover. That's enough for me. When they reached the doctor's house, the village doctor was waiting. He was a kind man, experienced in treating injuries and illnesses common in the frontier. Jacob explained Nayeli's condition. The accident in the forest, her paralysis, the days without food or proper water. The doctor quickly examined her, checking for broken bones, dehydration, and signs of infection. Her injuries are serious, the doctor said after a moment. She's lucky she made it this far. If she had been alone another night, she might not have survived. Nayeli's eyes filled with tears. She realized just how close she had been to death. Jacob stayed near her side, holding her hand and offering quiet words of comfort. The doctor administered treatment for her injuries and set up a schedule for care. including nutrition, gentle movement exercises, and monitoring for complications. Nayeli had never known such careful attention before, and it filled her with a mixture of relief and humility. The first days of recovery were the hardest. Nayeli's muscles had weakened, her body was sore, and every movement reminded her of the struggle she had endured. But the doctor, Jacob, and the villagers worked together to make her comfortable. Breaths. Jacob stayed by her side, helping her sit up, feeding her when she could not reach food, and encouraging her to take small steps toward healing. As she slowly regained strength, Nayeli began to open up more. She told Jacob about her family, the tribe, and the events that had led to her banishment. Speaking about her life lifted a weight from her heart. She realized that her story mattered, that surviving was not just about staying alive, it was about reclaiming her voice and her place in the world. Jacob listened with patience, never interrupting, never judging. He had seen enough hardship in his life to understand that people's mistakes or misunderstandings did not define them. Nayeli began to feel a sense of trust and connection she had never felt with anyone outside her tribe. His presence reminded her that kindness and courage still existed in the world. Perhaps the villagers were curious about her story but approached her gently, giving her space to heal. Nayeli found herself fascinated by their way of life, their routines, and their simple acts of care. She realized that though she had lost the life she knew, she had gained a new perspective, a new chance to live and grow stronger. Jacob became her constant companion. He helped her practice moving her legs, strengthening the muscles weakened by paralysis. Nayeli often winced in pain during these exercises, but Jacob encouraged her with words of reassurance. "You can do this," he would say. "Every small step counts. Look how far you've come already." Gradually, Nayeli began to see improvement. She could sit without support, then shift her weight, and finally take a few small steps with Jacob's help. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, brought joy and a sense of triumph. For the first time since being banished, she felt like she had control over her life again. The emotional recovery was just as important as the physical. Nayeli struggled with fear, shame, and sadness. She had been alone in the wilderness, left by her tribe, and paralyzed. She questioned her worth and doubted her future. But Jacob's unwavering support, along with the care of the doctor and villagers, reminded her that she was not defined by those moments of despair. She had survived, and that alone was proof of her strength. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, Nayeli and Jacob sat outside. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and the distant sound of flowing water. Nayeli looked at him and said, "I never thought anyone would care enough to help me." Jacob shrugged slightly, a modest gesture. "I couldn't just leave you. No one deserves to die alone if help is possible. You've shown so much courage, so much more than most people ever do." Nayeli smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not felt for days. "I want to get stronger, to walk again, to be able to return home someday." Jacob nodded. "You will. And when that time comes, you'll see that surviving is just the beginning. Life can still be full of hope." The days turned into weeks, and Nayeli's strength continued to grow. She began to walk short distances without support, then longer ones, until she could move through the village more confidently. But her spirit was recovering alongside her body. She learned to eat again with appetite, to rest without fear, and to look forward to each new day. During this time, she also began to think about her tribe. She wondered if they had assumed she would not survive, or if they had begun to regret their decision. She realized that forgiveness might be necessary, both for herself and for others. But for now, her focus remained on recovery and on the gratitude she felt for the people who had saved her life. Jacob's role in her recovery became increasingly important. He had not only rescued her from the forest, but he had also given her the courage to face life again. His patience, determination, and compassion reminded Nayeli that, even in the darkest moments, there could be light. She began to see him not just as a rescuer, but as a true friend. By the end of her time in the settlement, Nayeli had regained much of her strength. She could walk with minimal support, manage her daily needs, and even help with small tasks around the village. The doctor praised her progress, and Jacob encouraged her every step of the way. Nayeli realized that surviving the wilderness had been only the first part of her journey. Now, recovery, forgiveness, and reclaiming her life awaited her. As she prepared to leave the settlement, Nayeli felt a sense of gratitude and determination she had never known before. She had faced death, fear, and despair, and she had survived. She had experienced human kindness in its purest form and had learned the power of trust and compassion. And now, as she looked toward the future, she knew she could face anything with courage and strength. Jacob walked beside her, helping her adjust to the weight of walking longer distances. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the journey they had shared. "You've changed so much," Jacob said softly. "Not just physically, but in spirit." "You are stronger than you realize." Nayeli nodded, a quiet smile on her face. "I've learned that life is worth fighting for, and that sometimes someone's refusal to give up on you can make all the difference." As they left the village behind, Nayeli felt a renewed sense of hope. She was no longer the paralyzed, banished girl from the forest. She was Nayeli, a survivor, a fighter, and someone ready to face whatever came next. With Jacob by her side and her own courage guiding her, she knew she could endure anything. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Nayeli truly believed in the possibility of a brighter future. Nayeli had come a long way since the day Jacob had found her in the forest, paralyzed and near death. Her body was stronger now, her muscles gradually regaining their strength, and her movements were becoming more confident as she could walk without support for longer distances, though she still used a walking stick occasionally. More importantly, her spirit had grown stronger. She had faced despair and fear, and she had survived. She felt a quiet but powerful sense of pride in herself. Breaths. Jacob continued to support her, not just physically but emotionally. He had become more than a rescuer. He had become a friend, a steady presence she could rely on. They spoke often during their walks through the valley, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. Jacob had learned about her life in the tribe, about her family, and the reasons she had been banished. And Nayeli had learned about Jacob's life on the ranch, the hardships he had faced, and the courage that had led him to risk everything to save a stranger. One afternoon, as they rested under a large oak tree, Nayeli spoke quietly. "Raish, I've been thinking about my tribe," she said. "I wonder what they must think. I wonder if they believe I'm dead, or if they regret sending me away." Jacob looked at her, his expression serious but gentle. "Whatever they think doesn't change what you've survived. You've grown stronger because of it. And you have the choice now. Whatever path you take, it's yours." Nayeli thought about his words long and hard. The thought of returning to her tribe filled her with mixed emotions. Desperation. She loved her family and the people she had grown up with, but the memory of her banishment still stung. She had been left alone, facing death without anyone to help her. Yet she also knew that forgiveness might bring her peace. She realized that the decision was not just about returning home. It was about reclaiming her life and her sense of self. Over the next few days, Nayeli began preparing for the journey back. Jacob helped her with her strength exercises and her walking practice, ensuring she could manage the trek through the wilderness safely. She packed only what was necessary, careful not to overburden herself. As they prepared to leave the valley, Nayeli felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She was no longer helpless, but the fear of the unknown still lingered. When they finally set out, the journey was difficult but manageable. Nayeli walked steadily, Jacob nearby, offering support when she needed it. The forest that had once seemed terrifying now felt familiar in a strange way. She had survived its dangers, learned its secrets, and come to respect its challenges. Every step forward felt like a victory, a testament to her resilience and courage. As they neared the edge of the tribe's territory, Nayeli's heart began to race. Memories flooded her mind, the warmth of her family's home, the laughter of her siblings, the lessons her parents had taught her. She also remembered the fear and shame of being banished. She wondered how she would be received. Would they welcome her or reject her again? Would her family be angry, or would they forgive her? When they finally arrived at the outskirts of the tribal village, Nayeli paused, breath, and looked at Jacob. I need to do this on my own from here, she said softly. I need to face them, to see if forgiveness is possible. Jacob nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. Believe you can. You've already survived more than most people could imagine. Brace, you're stronger than you know. Nayeli stepped forward, her heart pounding, and entered the village. At first, there was silence. People stopped their daily activities and stared. They had heard stories of her disappearance, and many assumed she had died in the wilderness. Now here she was, alive and walking, her presence a living testament to survival and courage. Her family was the first to approach. Her younger siblings ran forward, embracing her with tears and laughter. Nayeli felt a rush of emotion as she hugged them back, overwhelmed by the love she had missed for so long. Her parents followed, their eyes filled with a mixture of relief, sorrow, and pride. Her father spoke first. Nayeli, we feared the worst. We are so glad you are alive. Nayeli held back tears and smiled gently. I am alive, thanks to someone who refused to let me die, she said, thinking of Jacob. I have survived, and I want to find a way to move forward. The elders approached next, their expressions solemn. Nayeli explained what had happened, the misunderstanding that led to her banishment, and the journey she had endured in the wilderness. She spoke with honesty and calm, recounting not just her suffering but also the lessons she had learned about courage, resilience, and forgiveness. After a long silence, the elders nodded. They had heard her story, and though the banishment had been strict, they recognized her strength and survival.
Nayeli had proven herself not only physically, but emotionally, showing wisdom beyond her years.
One of the elders spoke softly. Nayeli, you have faced death and survived. We see your courage. You are welcome to return, but you have the right to choose your own path. Nayeli felt a deep sense of peace. She had not only survived but had regained the power to make her own decisions. She could return to her tribe, reconnect with her family, and reclaim her place among them. Or she could choose a new life, guided by her experiences and her strength. After much thought, Nayeli made her choice. She would return to her family, but she would do so on her own terms. She would no longer be defined by fear, shame, or the actions of others. Balist, she had survived the wilderness, had been cared for by Jacob and the villagers, and had discovered her own inner strength. She would face her tribe as an equal, not as someone who had been banished and powerless. Her family embraced her decision, supporting her fully. They had feared losing her forever, and now they were determined to help her rebuild her life. The villagers and Jacob had shown her that kindness and courage existed beyond the tribe, and she would carry those lessons with her. Always. In the days that followed, Nayeli reconnected with her community. She shared her story, teaching others about survival, resilience, and the power of compassion. Her experiences in the wilderness became a lesson not just for her family, but for everyone in the tribe. She became a symbol of hope and strength, a living example of what could be achieved through courage and determination. Birth. Jacob remained a close friend, a constant presence in her life. Though their paths were different, their bond endured. Nayeli often thought of the day he had refused to let her die, and she realized how much that single act of courage had changed her life. Without him, she might not have survived, and she certainly would not have discovered the depth of her own strength. As time passed, Nayeli grew stronger physically and emotionally. She walked freely, helped with daily tasks in the village, and nurtured her relationships with her family and friends. She never forgot the lessons of survival, nor did she forget the kindness that had saved her life. She understood that life could be harsh and unfair, but it could also be filled with hope, compassion, and courage. One evening, as she walked through the village with Jacob by her side, Nayeli looked at the sky, painted with the colors of sunset. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for her survival, for her family, for the people who had helped her, and for the inner strength she had discovered. "I never imagined I would see this day," she said softly. "I thought I would die alone in the forest." Jacob smiled, his eyes reflecting pride and warmth. "And yet, here you are, alive, strong, ready to face whatever comes next." Nayeli nodded, feeling the weight of those words. She had faced death, fear, and despair. She had been banished, paralyzed, and alone. Yet she had survived. She had learned the value of trust, the importance of courage, and the power of compassion. And now she was ready to live fully, with hope and determination guiding her every step. Her story, once of despair, had become one of triumph. Nayeli had not only survived the wilderness, but had also reclaimed her life and her place in the world. She had faced impossible odds and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. And through it all, she had learned the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the courage and kindness of one person can change the course of a life forever. As night fell over the village, Nayeli stood outside her family's home, looking at the stars above. She felt a sense of peace she had not known since the day she had been banished. The wilderness had tested her in every way, but she had endured. And now, with her family, her friends, and Jacob by her side, she knew that life, though challenging, could also be beautiful, full of hope, and filled with the possibility of new beginnings. Nayeli smiled, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them. She had survived, she had healed, and she had found her place in the world once more. But in her heart, she carried the memory of the cowboy who refused to let her die. A reminder that courage and compassion can create miracles, even in the darkest of times.